As we know, the, the challenges in healthcare can be very obvious. We want equal access for all, best treatment for all, and the very best outcomes for our patients. But we have to remember that not every disease is fully understood, not every disorder is curable, and medicine needs to continually advance. And so we talked about world class this morning. So you're never really world class because you're always evolving and changing. That's how I would think about it. And we get a little bit distracted because we hear a lot about patients on trolleys, and of course that's a problem, but there's a lot of other root causes that should be dealt with to really solve those problems in a more sophisticated way if you want to. And we also talked a lot about the patients and what we want for our patients, and also what do the patients want. That was discussed this morning. And I'm a little bit selfish. I go beyond the patient when I think about this, and I think about my family. What do I want for my own family? So even though I work in medicine every day with the challenges, I say, well, what would I want for my own family in that? And here you see my lovely wife and three great daughters. And what I realized is that three of us wouldn't be as healthy as we are today without modern medicine, because three of us had critical disorders that needed to be treated and needed modern medicine. And not only that, but a key part of the treatment was technology and the technology part of that medicine. So without modern medical practice, we certainly wouldn't be as healthy as we are today, and God forbid one of us might not even be alive today as a result of that. So, and I wonder if anybody checks through their family, they could probably have a similar scenario, or maybe we're just unfortunate. But it's just about thinking about those things and what you want from medicine, and that's what I try to do every day. And then clinical practice is changing very, very radically and very, very quickly. The traditional view is the doctor with the knowledge and the skills, and that's key, and that's always important. And then what we see more recently is the modern view, where knowledge and skills and where technology is used as a tool. But I think that there's a future view developing, and it's developing very, very rapidly. So knowledge, skills, and technology are taken as a baseline, and we need to bring other skills to the table, sort of creativity, concept of improving and process improving, and we call technology as intelligence. So in some cases, the technology will actually make the diagnosis or provide the treatment, not the doctor. Of course, it'll be related to the doctor and the doctor's prescription, but I think that's what we're moving towards, and it has happened in certain sectors, and I think it's going to become much more common. And to drive that, we need education, research, and innovation to do that, and innovation in a very broad sense. And we also talk about, again, just wanted to bring that theme of world class in. We talk about the best doctors, and I made this point earlier. We have very, very good doctors in the system. And broadly speaking, no matter where you go in this country, if you're being treated by a doctor, you can pretty much guarantee it's a good doctor. They're very highly skilled. They're consultant-led. Most of the consultants have done advanced training abroad. That's how competitive these jobs are. But what about the best technology? Would you want to know that your disease was diagnosed with the best scanner, or that the doctor treating you is using the best technology? There's a much bigger question mark over that, particularly in Ireland in the current environment. And I like the idea that we really need to drive medical care to keep up with the latest technology. And I like this diagram adopted from The Economist, and it talks about the adoption of technologies. And if you look at electricity in 1873, it was 46 years before 25% of the American population adopted or got electricity. And then if you go to the television in 1926, it was 26 years before 25% of the population had adopted it. But if you look at the smartphone only took 2 years for 25% of the population to adopt it. And of course, the smartphone is much more than a phone. It's a computer, and it's an advanced piece of technology. So technology is accelerating at a fast rate, and I certainly don't believe medicine is able to keep up with that rate for all sorts of reasons. I mentioned this morning. This is an interesting piece of data because not much of it comes out in the Irish Times last week. Apparently, this is from a HSE document. We can see that medical equipment is rapidly aging in this country, and these are statistics in key equipment areas for the amount of equipment that's more than 10 years old. So, for example, 45% of all our anaesthetic equipment is more than 10 years old, or 50% of our ventilators, which keep people alive. That's quite frightening. as I say, look around at the other technology you have. Nobody has a 10-year-old phone or a 10-year-old laptop. And if you have a 10-year-old car, you're very aware of its limitations. You might not drive to Cork in it or want to drive to Cork in it. So if we think about that in the context, that's quite frightening. And this is something that we need to look at. So are we using the latest technology in medicine? Are our clinicians assisted by the latest technology in medicine? And if we move into this next phase where it's technology-driven, where does it leave us? Where do we stand? And it isn't, of course, just about medical devices. You can no longer distinguish between a lot of the things that happen in medicine. Medical technology is completely integrated with ICT and digital tools, the concept of information and information flow in general. And to me, the number one, and I mentioned this morning as well, it's about process. It doesn't matter if you have a brilliant e-health system. If you can't go in and convince the people who perform the job to sit down around the table and improve their process, find a way of improving the process, then you'll find the digital tools to do what you want to do. So there's no point in saying you have this great e-health solution if you can't engage the people to step back from what they're doing and actually change what they're doing for the benefit of patients. And again, the point that the health system is so understaffed at the moment that these people are firefighting, and it's very hard to get them even to engage, to get doctors and nurses to step back from what they're doing and spend some time looking at how they're going to improve a process. It does happen, but it's very challenging. So not just where things can be, but how we improve them. And I believe the root of this is innovation, driving things through innovation. And I like to remind myself and you what innovation is, because you see all sorts of definition. It's about taking ideas and making those into entities that add value. That's really what innovation is about. And it's not just about technology. It's products, services, and even in society. So it has a very wide brief, but the principles can often be the same. So taking an idea, sometimes it comes from research, sometimes it doesn't. Developing an invention from that, and then developing an innovative product that can be used in the market. And is research innovation? That's a good question. We talk about, sometimes people talk about innovative research, but just because the surgeon got a brand new gadget and he's employing it in the hospital for surgery doesn't mean he's innovating. He may be improving his service, but he's not actually innovating. If he's providing a new service, or if he's come up with a whole new way of using the device, that's innovation, potentially, but not just because he's got the new gadget. That's not innovation. And we talk about disruptive innovation, something that's completely new and novel, and then the concept of incremental innovation, where we just improve a service, we just add something on to add value to what we're doing. So I think, in my head, I tend to think back on the world and how these things evolved. And I have a particular interest in endoscopes, so I'm going to use it to illustrate an example. It depends on who you speak to, but different people say different people invented the endoscope. And strangely enough, there's an Irish guy involved. It was probably this guy, Philip Bozzini, who wasn't a very famous guy. He was Austro-German physician. Working with very poor people. I think he eventually got cholera and died. So he probably sketched his idea, built a model, tried his device, got feedback on it from using it, and then applied it again. And he didn't have to worry about ethics or anything like that. And this guy in Dublin, working in the Mater Hospital at the time, Francis Cruz, he came up with his own version of an endoscope. And of course, these are the forerunners of the modern endoscopes that you can see on the left here, that are used every day and are a key part of medicine. So when these guys went to try a device, they didn't have to get ethics approval. They probably just pulled some poor patient in and stuck something into them to see how they get on. And we might all think that's hilarious and whatever, but at least they were able to rapidly try these devices, find out if they work, and we've all probably benefited from that, whether we want to believe that or not. And also, they didn't have a whole team of manufacturing engineers. They're probably working with blacksmiths and carpenters, people that they got to know personally. And of course, that was a little innovative chain, and it allowed them to rapidly test things and try things. And it comes along very nicely with the concepts developed by Edison, who we talk about inventing the light bulb, but what we forget is he invented a whole infrastructure for electricity as well. And he said to invent, you need a good imagination and a pile of junk. And that's very true. You don't actually need to very sophisticated things. These people were what we call polymaths. They were all in one: designer, engineer, quality, and clinical trials person. They didn't really have to worry about regulation, ethics, quality, or material compatibility. And of course, we've got to worry about these, and we've got to contextualize things, and that's important. And what they were allowed to do, which is a very difficult thing to do now in medicine, is fail. And we talked a little bit about this again this morning. But of course, failure isn't always an option in medicine. You can't trial and test things on live patients. So, but as Tim Brown from Stanford and IDEO said, failure is an extremely efficient form of learning. Put yourself in the place where you can fail as fast as possible. So I think we need to find a place or a safe place where medical professionals can test things and trial them, and if they fail, there's no harm done. They're not doing any harm. So I'm going to park that for a minute. The other thing I want to talk about is the concept of educating people in innovation. I'd used these slides a few years ago and stopped using it, but now I see these two chaps back in action. I said, I think I'll use this slide again. And it's quite a nice analogy. And I've kind of adopted it from a Harvard Business article. So the idea is that you have two persons with the same brains, the same natural talent, and you give them 1 week to come up with a creative idea. So twin one comes up with the ideas in a room alone with books and the internet. Twin two talks to 10 people about their idea, including an engineer, a musician, a stay-at-home dad and a designer, visits 3 innovative startups, samples 5 new-to-market products, shows a prototype is built to 5 people, asks what, if and why at least 10 times during the networking, observing and experimenting activities. And the question is, who's going to come up with the more innovative idea? It may seem obvious, but very often, and many of us, spent all our time being educated by sitting up in a room with books. So we didn't actually spend the time out in the real world. And that's key. So how can we educate people, particularly our younger people, to be more innovative? Or at least, I don't actually think you can actually educate somebody to be innovative, but you can create an environment where they might be innovative, they might at least come up with something new. And we talk about this idea of reclaiming their creative confidence. And in fact, this is me when I was very young. In fact, most of the people in this are my relatives. This is me over here on the right. So I just when you think about creative confidence in yourself, you think about when you were small. I think I'm using a watering can and a couple of utensils as a drum there, so obviously using some really creative skills. And the idea that the education system kind of beats this out of you. So as you become more educated and you go right through to postgraduate education, you become more knowledgeable and you may even get more experience, but often our creative confidence goes down because the system makes us too blinkered, it's too structured. And we have to bear that in mind. And then if you're a doctor or a nurse and you get into a hospital that's over-regulated and you have to stick to the regulations, where's there time to come up with an idea, to trial an idea or test an idea? And this is what the big challenge is, I think. So my work recently with the Innovation Academy in Trinity College Dublin looks at trying to use this space to try and develop these core skills. Initially we were doing it in PhD students. Now we've expanded it to do it undergraduates and others, actually to scholars themselves and also to executives. And just trying to instill these concepts in people through engagement, through using tools and networking. And in fact, in the last couple of years, we've been driving some initiatives under the European Innovation and Technology Centre through summer schools, and that's been interesting and challenging. And links in with other concepts, and the government are picking up on this bit, the idea of a national healthcare innovation hub, and that's been set up and is running, coordinated from Cork. So the idea that there's a pathway for innovation into hospital through that hub, but it's still a long way to go and needs to develop. So how can we take a new approach to innovation in healthcare? Well, implementing tools such as design thinking in healthcare. So that's a structured process for ideating and innovating. We need to see more of that. And also to involve all players in that. So it's not just the doctors, not just the nurses. It's a collaborative effort for me, I think, right across the spectrum of a complete variety of healthcare workers, patients, and even companies who provide services to hospitals to really think out how we use technology in the ecosystem better, start with the process, and then add in the tools that are needed as we go along. So if innovation is the way, what do we need to succeed? And I like this statement, again, it's from IDEO. Enlightened trial and error succeeds over the plan of the lone genius. No one person has the smart ideas anymore, and it's unlikely that the people at the top of the chain have the best ideas. It's about engagement, and it's about creating team and initiatives around that. So we need to create an environment where failure can occur. We need a diverse team, and not just those experienced in the field. And we need good training in innovation tools and facilitation skills. And we need innovation not just in technology, but in processes, devices, and ICT, and they're all key. So we model this to our research group. I run a research group with some gastroenterologists, and we try to drive a forum there for innovation and bringing innovation projects too. And I just want to give one example from my own experience in that, just to show you that I'm not an academic just blowing off about stuff. I actually do this stuff for real. This is a technology that I invented. It's a way of measuring valves in the gastrointestinal tract. And what you can do is pass a catheter with a balloon on the end of it through a narrow region or a valve and measure geometric changes in that valve. You can see this is it in the esophagastric junction, which is the valve that causes heartburn. And this has been evolved over a number of years. So we can create, and what we discovered very early on, that if we use visualization techniques, we can make this very effective and very efficient. So we come up with the concept of the functional Lumen imaging probe. So we measure geometries and then we display them in a way that doctors can make quick assessments from them. So here's an example of a normal control. And here's an example of a patient with a disease where the valve is locked or tight and it won't relax. So straight away, there's a visual image that gives you an indication of a state for a patient. And so what we started to do was, instead of competing with people who are developing other areas, we innovatively collaborated with them. So these group came up with a way of measuring valves using radiological images. And what we did is we collaborated with them towards developing a tool. And this tool was then commercialized by a company in Galway called Crosspon. And so basically something that was developed in the lab became a working tool, and it's developed then over a number of years for different applications. And what I've done is built my research out of trying to look at how this technology can be used in lots of other valves in the digestive system. Here it's been used in the upper esophageal sphincter at the top of the valve, related to patients who've had stroke and who can't swallow. Other research, the sphincter of Oddi, and other applications in terms of biomechanics. Here it's been used in surgery in a training center in France to assist surgeons in making a myotary or a muscle cut that's much more precise than before. And it's also won quite a number of awards over the last number of years. But what was really interesting about this was, what we discovered was that one of the groups we were collaborating with come up with an even further new use of the technology. And they discovered that instead of sending a patient off to have a study around what their swallow performance, you could use this technology to push a probe down into the endoscope when they're having an endoscopy procedure, and it will actually tell you about their motility thereaway. So the images circled in red are images that they can now correlate with the other images, which are the standard images, and it tells them about the state of the swallowing inside a patient. So that's an example of something we hadn't seen in the technology, and the technology advancing further again and used in an application. So that's quite exciting to see someone else building on a technology that you've brought it to the world. So really, it's just to show how collaboration is a huge part of these things and how we can develop things forward. So what I've really learned from this is that research can have a much bigger impact through innovation. And clinicians and other healthcare professionals working directly with patients need to have a role in innovation. So innovation has to be brought to the bedside. And collaborative interactions that are facilitated accelerate the innovation process. And really, bringing back to the concept there's no such thing as a bad idea. There was a discussion earlier today about people might be afraid to bring forward this idea. So we need to provide forums where people can bring their ideas forward. Young people tend to ideate better than older people, but if you can combine the ideas of younger people with the experience of older people, I think that's where the magic can happen. And innovation can drive research, but it's slower and initially riskier. And then somebody asked me one time, would you get risk? Certainly not, but at least it's interesting, makes life interesting. So thanks very much, and thank you to a lot of the people who sponsor my research and some of the groups that I work with. Thanks a lot.